Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the opening event of the WFA Global Marketer Week, which will take place in 3 weeks' time from April 20th to April 22nd. Now, today is a sort of appetizer, a cocktail, if you will, to lift us a bit from this pandemic blues. Now, not many events are run live right now. However, we've decided to be brave and we do it live, so please bear with us and forgive any glitches. Now, we'd like the session to be interactive, so we will be running a poll. And so for you to be familiar with how to vote, if you could check out on the right-hand side of your screen the poll button so that you're ready to go when we do the poll. Okay, excellent. Now, before we move to our focus for today, I'd like to recognize and thank our sponsors for their continuous support. Thank you to our platinum sponsor, RTL AdConnect. Thank you to our premier sponsors, WFA and Ubiquity. And thank you to all our other partners, to Appraise, to Adform, to Facebook, Friedman, Global Data Bank, Infectious Media, PhD, Singapore Tourism Board, Singapore Exhibition and Convention Bureau, and to TikTok. And now is the time for our poll. So on the right-hand side of your screen, please click on the poll button and cast your vote. And here's the question I'd like you to respond to. Do you feel the marketing industry takes itself too seriously? There are 3 options. No, if we don't take ourselves seriously, who else will? Option 2, yes. We could be accused of navel-gazing from time to time. And option 3, definitely. If you can't laugh at yourself, you're doing it wrong. Now, while you're voting, please note that on that same right-hand side of the screen, you can post your questions in the Q&A widget and any comments in the chat function during our session, okay? So we'll give it 5 more seconds to get the responses and look at the results. And hey there, so we're an overwhelming majority of our participants who still have a good dose of humor and self-derision, and that is very, very good and very encouraging. And that's an excellent segue into today's speaker, to present Tom Fishburne. Tom Fishburne is known to many of you for his Marketoonist series, and they've grown incredibly by word of mouth to reach more than 200,000 readers every week. Now, they featured in the Wall Street Journal, they featured in the New York Times, they've even appeared in Times Square. And I think the reason why Tom's work is so popular in our industry is probably that our industry at times has a tendency to take itself a little seriously. And if his cartoons make us laugh, there's probably a reason for that. But anyway, laughing at ourselves is a very good thing. And it's actually also a very good thing from a health perspective. It reduces blood pressure, it helps us see more clearly, and it lifts our spirits. So probably the type of medication we all need a bit more right now. Now, as a marketer, one can be forgiven at times to feel a little bit overwhelmed these days. Now, so many of society's biggest and most difficult challenges are also big items on our agenda. The global economic recession, gender and racial inequalities, climate change, hate speech online, you name them. But we also see the positives, we also see the opportunities, and they're wonderfully captured by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's a once-in-history collective effort to try and address issues that are bigger than any of the stakeholders involved. And where marketing has truly a potential to make a real difference, a huge difference. And that is our deep conviction. Our deep conviction is that we can be a force for good and a force for growth. To quote Mark Pritchard, the Chief Brand Officer of Procter & Gamble, the WFA Global Marketer of the Year, who will also speak at our conference in 3 weeks' time. Now, we can be a force for good and a force for growth, provided we manage to unleash the incredible creative and innovative power of our industry. And that's going to be the common thread across our conference in 3 weeks' time. And on this optimistic note, let's unpack this busy agenda with a good dose of humor. And it's my pleasure to welcome Tom Fishburne, the Chief Marketoonist. Over you, Tom.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to help kick off and be that appetizer for Global Marketing Week. I'm speaking to you all from a corner of my cartoon studio just north of San Francisco. For nearly the last 20 years, I've been drawing this weekly cartoon called Marketoonist that comments on some of what I've been going through myself in marketing, and many of you as well. I want to start with a cartoon I drew just about this time last year. There are a few executives around the table. Digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon, as this big COVID-19 wrecking ball comes from the side. And that wrecking ball moment, I think, is something that has been felt across business in general, and definitely felt across marketing in every way, shape, and form. But what I find interesting about the wrecking ball was expressed by a professor named Scott Galloway. He said that COVID-19 is an accelerant, not a change agent. So many of the trends and themes and shifts that we're reacting to and having to suddenly change how we operate is really more of an accelerant of things that were already in process and underway. And that is how I want to start with reflecting on the three themes of Global Marketing Week that I've been asked to think about: better world, better society, better growth. These are big and weighty themes, and in 3 weeks, they'll be covered in much more depth by practitioners who are working in the trenches. But what I want to do today is talk about these through the lens of humor, and how we can think in the realm of marketing, how we change and work toward these themes. I feel like the idea of change in marketing can often go one of two ways. One, it's change all the time. This year, we're disrupting how we do marketing. Didn't we do that last year? Last year, we transformed marketing. No, that was 2 years ago. Oh, right, we're reinventing marketing. It's about time. So in one sense, marketing is perpetually talking about change and how we need to evolve. And in another sense, we can sometimes find ourselves in this environment. Instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence. And so I think both of those dynamics are true at the same time in marketing. And they've fueled a lot of my humor in the cartoons as I've worked in many of these environments and have thought about how marketing is in the process of changing and evolving. I'm glad that Stefan started today with the poll that he did and with the introduction about the role that humor can play. I'm a big believer that we need our sense of humor more than ever, particularly when we're grappling with big, significant, weighty issues. I started drawing these cartoons while an associate marketing manager at General Mills. This was initially a total hobby. I was working in my day job. I was observing things that were happening around me. I sometimes felt like I couldn't speak freely in a big hierarchical environment. I felt like there were things that were around us that were just not getting talked about. And so I started drawing these cartoons, and I found very quickly that the cartoons actually started turning into speaking points, that people could sometimes find a way to talk about them through the cartoons. A friend of mine described this phenomenon once when I was sitting in a big cubicle farm inside of General Mills. I used to send out my cartoon in the middle of the workday, and a friend of mine said that there was this phenomenon he described as prairie dogging, where I would send the cartoon out to a few of my colleagues, and heads would sort of pop up over the cubicle walls, and we'd talk about different things. And I found over time that effect is what I've been trying to recreate in my cartoons ever since. And I found that humor in general in the workplace is something that can actually allow us to address some things that we fundamentally need to talk about. There's sort of three big kind of ideas that or kind of insights that I've found over the years in working with humor. That humor is disarming. It lets you talk about uncomfortable truths. It lets you talk about things that need to be talked about that sometimes can't be talked about in other ways. There's a sense of belonging with humor, that when you're in on the joke with others and you're suddenly laughing at the same things collectively, it allows you to bond and feel like you're not going through it alone. And lastly, there's a sense of vulnerability that you could actually, by laughing at yourself, showing that you are laughing at what you're going through, you're admitting your vulnerability, that not everything is perfect. And given that we're in a state of change and things are constantly evolving, that's pretty crucial. And I had the opportunity a few years ago to work with a few professors at Stanford Business School who were creating the first ever course on humor in business. Jennifer Aker and Naomi Naomi Bagdonas have sort of created a whole curriculum believing that business leaders really need a sense of humor. And they cite one piece of research that I find really interesting. They looked at some Gallup data that looked at 1.4 million people around the world and measured how frequently people generally laugh over the course of a day. And they found that there's something they described as the humor cliff, that about the time that we enter our first jobs, we suddenly fall off a cliff and don't laugh as much as we used to. And that trend sort of follows along roughly until retirement and then starts to pick up again. And their big belief is that we shouldn't fall off it, that our sense of humor is more important than ever and can allow us to deal with big and weighty things. And so I believe that's true in marketing. So I want to talk about the first theme, better world. And I'm going to start with just a few cartoons that I've explored sort of roughly around the edges in my own experience as a marketer and what I've observed as we try to grapple with this theme. What's our plan for sustainability? Our brand is already sustainable. Our packaging is recyclable, at least theoretically, in a lab test. We donate to causes with green names. We even use claims like eco-happy. But isn't there more we can do? Of course, we haven't started advertising about it yet. With every tree we plant, we offset some of the carbon from all the hot air we produce, talking about how sustainable this makes us. People want brands to be purpose-led. We have to show where we stand. We're not just about profit. We have real beliefs and values. So here's our new creative brief. Let's start making ads with purpose. Okay, so what exactly is your purpose? You're the ad agency, you tell us. And that can lead to this. We support whatever causes seem to be popular with millennials. But you said to communicate our brand purpose in an authentic way. So I've seen a lot in this theme. I've been trying to parody with humor so that we can really sort of think about where we operate. Obviously, this is a big, weighty topic. How do brands operate in the world? And I want to share just a little bit of an experience that I had that helped me think about this. I had the chance, 5 years of my marketing experience was with a consumer products brand called Method. Method started in the US, is now available in other parts of the world, has grown quite rapidly. And sustainability has been a big part of its identity. And how do you talk about that? I want to start with one product and then give a couple of examples. After I left Method in 2012, they came out with this product, and I found it really interesting. It was the first ever bottle that was made out of ocean plastic. And it was a one-off product. They had it in Whole Foods, but they created a tremendous amount of attention around the amount of ocean plastic. And it was quite a logistical and technical feat to be able to collect the ocean plastic that they needed and actually be able to build structurally sound bottles using ocean plastic. And so it's one product. So what's the big impact of one product? Well, I think it reflects a little bit of a philosophy that we always talked about within Method, this idea of progress, not perfection. And that's the idea that when you have a big weighty issue, there's never a perfect end state. And you're ultimately never at a state of perfection. So you're ultimately always trying to maintain and push progress in what you're trying to do. And this is not a case for getting complacent. It's constantly making progress on what you're trying to do. And in the case of Method, I joined the brand when there were only 20 people in the organization, and there were just what kind of impact can you create with that? But this was sort of a rallying cry that we were continually trying to do things, and things like the ocean plastic bottle was both symbolic, but also substantive. We were proving use cases for other larger brands. And so I feel like that progress, not perfection, can be a bit of a way to think about a lot of these issues. How do you continually focus on making progress? And ultimately, that's about change and ultimately evolving how we do business. And at Method, that became something that again and again and again, we were constantly pushing and seeing how we could do things a little bit differently. One of the first biodiesel freight routes. And then the big kind of wake up, the big project they initiated that I found really inspiring was in 2015 when they launched a new a new factory on the south side of Chicago in the Pullman neighborhood, taking over a former brownfield site that had been completely abandoned. It was the first new factory development in 30 years. And so as the brand grew, it was an opportunity to think about sustainability much more at the core. And ultimately that flowed through the entire experience of what was going on behind the brand to make big advances forward. Here's a recharge station for powered forklifts. The entire factory, 50% of the factory was powered by solar. And it reflected this idea of the brand we described as people against dirty. That's who we felt we were working for the brand. And ultimately, we started thinking about our consumers the same way, that the brand we described on every bottle was made by and for people against dirty. And a lot of this work is things that maybe not even seen by the outside world. But ultimately, if you believe that your brand is impacting a broader society, everybody in the extended organization, everybody who works there is ultimately part of the brand. And that philosophy kind of flows all the way through. This is a photo at the opening day when the site was commemorated. And so I find this this idea of progress, not perfection, a way to think about big, weighty issues like creating a better world. Because if you're a small brand, you can punch harder than your weight and prove things that can ultimately reach a broader audience through scale. Method is now part of SC Johnson, and this became a way for even that small idea with a couple of products in 2012 can then be advanced to a much larger brand. And I feel like that's how change happens. And if we think about some of the change that we're trying to make, we can be on that continuum of progress, not perfection. I think that applies also to this topic of better society and how marketers think about what we do in the context of the world at large. I drew this cartoon of this large whack-a-mole. We just have to make sure our digital ads never run next to unsafe content. And this cartoon I drew inspired by something I heard from the former head of media at Mars, Rob Rakowitz, that brand safety is a constant game of whack-a-mole. And he was right in the trenches of that. And his current role is actually part of the WFA focused on developing the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. And so this is another case, I think, of progress, not perfection. How do we address a big, weighty topic like this and continue to make progress, not getting complacent, and ultimately acknowledging that we have a long way to go, but we can continue to make progress. And I feel like it plays out across our evolution as marketers. It's constantly this idea of how we come across new things and get better at what we do so that we can make that progress. Are the digital ads we buy actually being seen? Absolutely. Almost half the time. At least 50% of the pixels for a whole second. Hopefully by a human. Maybe on a site without porn, but there's no way to verify that. That explains the low CPM. Yep, it's a great deal. How do we work with fake influencers, with fake followers and fake engagement in a more authentic way? And so a few people being woken up in the middle of the night. Right person, right message, wrong time. Looks like we still have some work to do. And in marketing, I think it's constantly about a case of evaluating, and I've tried to use my cartoons to highlight areas where we can improve so that we can laugh at them and try to find a way to move forward. And this cartoon was inspired a bit about, I think, what we all try to do in marketing. We try to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. And I feel like there can be a disconnect with society at large that's important to acknowledge and think about how we work within that. In 2002, the movie Minority Report came out, and there was one scene in the movie that became this thing that all marketers were talking about. The Tom Cruise character, John Anderton, walked through a futuristic mall where the mall scanned his retina, and he was receiving personalized ads directed specifically toward him. And I've seen this clip in so many marketing conferences over the years, and it's usually painted in a utopian light. Wow, we can actually do this someday. We can actually find unique ideas with cell phones and give people targeted ads as they're walking through a physical space. But the reality is, if you look at this clip in broader society, whenever I've heard it referenced, it's been in a dystopian sense. Do we really want to live in a world like this? And I drew a cartoon once inspired by that. John Anderton walking through a futuristic futuristic supermarket. John Anderton, how are your hemorrhoids? Are you ready for the next Danielle Steele? You still struggling with incontinence? And I feel like that disconnect is something that we need to think about, the impact of our marketing on the world at large, the tools that are at our disposal, and actually we can think about how they impact broader society in a way that's positive. Don't worry, it's only marketers collecting our personal data so they can create more relevant advertising for us. And this plays out in big ways and then small ways too. Bad personalization is worse than no personalization. This brand newsletter just called me first name instead of Virginia. Macchiato for vagina. So I think we have more tools at our disposal than ever before in marketing, but thinking through the impact on society at large is also more important than ever before. And I'm inspired by examples that can really think about what we have and really keep that lens in place. There's a brand in the UK called Bloom and Wild. They use a lot of data to get better as a company, think about how to serve their consumers in a better way. They found, for instance, that there were a lot of buying occasions around for people who were buying flowers for their grandparents. So they helped pioneer this whole idea about encouraging people to buy flowers for their grandparents. That's a great use of data. But what I found most inspiring is what they decided not to do with their data, how they influenced their marketing to be more sensitive. They had the insight that around Mother's Day, there are a lot of people who don't want to receive constant Mother's Day marketing. One of the comments from somebody, it must be really horrible not to have a mom and be bombarded by excessive Mother's Day marketing. So they used a lot of the tools at their disposal, not only to get to this insight, but ultimately to provide an easy way to opt out of Mother's Day marketing. And that would roll out through the entire chain. So I think that's a really good example of thinking about marketing within the society at large to create an environment of better society. I think that rolls out throughout the entire approach to marketing that we have. And then lastly, I want to talk through the idea of better growth. So I'll start with this cartoon. What does my job entail? Being purpose-driven, aligning with worthy causes, creating cultural conversations, bringing people together, making the world a better place. What about getting people to buy stuff? Sure, I guess that's part of marketing too. So ultimately, if we want to create any impact at all, the role of the business is paramount. Kind of creating a healthy business can lead to a lot of the things that we want to do. And sometimes I see the continuum where the actual commercial aspect of the marketing job is overlooked. And I see the aspect sometimes where we can get funnel vision. When we think about marketing tactics, we think so much over the course of a marketing funnel, we don't think enough about the extended world of the people that we're trying to reach. It can lead to a situation where we're a little bit funnel blinded of sorts, just driving people to a transaction, to a purchase. And the reality is people's lives are much more complex. Actually, I'm just looking for the bathroom. And this is something that, if we work in marketing, we're all also, at the end of the day, consumers and people, and we're exposed to things that ultimately forget who we are as people. I'm constantly looking out for examples where I see misfires. One thing happened recently where I walked into the kitchen, our dishwasher was broken, there were soapy bubbles all over the floor, and the letters FU were flashing on the screen. And I had to Google it to find out that stood for failed unit. But to have a dishwasher saying FU to me took me to not a great place. But I found as I was going through the entire customer journey, there were so many aspects of marketing that I could see what they were going at, but ultimately made it harder for me to buy my next dishwasher. Searching leads to clickbait, sites not optimized for mobile, overwhelmed by choice, sifting through fake reviews, unclear tech specs, looking for a number to call, waiting on hold, endless retargeting ads. We may have to get used to washing these by hand. And that disconnect can lead to some really bad marketing. We're testing new digital ad formats that are harder to ignore. Careful, the last content was full of marketing. I think my Nest smoke alarm is going off. Google AdWords just pitched me a fire extinguisher and an offer for temporary housing. So some of the disconnects that we see, I think, are kind of thinking about growth purely from one lens and not getting the broader view, having too much funnel vision. The reality is if you took a brain scan of the average consumer, they're not thinking about our brands and our marketing. They're thinking about their lives. My husband, my kids, my career, my friends. I don't see our brand of pickle relish anywhere. There's a quote from a professor a few years ago that I like, that people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And in reality, they don't even want a 1/4-inch hole. They just want to place a way to hang up a frame on their wall. And too often, I think in marketing, we get that silo, that funnel vision that prevents them from seeing the whole humanity. And I feel like the opportunity for better growth is ultimately to think about marketing through the context of true utility for the people that we're trying to reach. That's where true growth comes from. Charmin had a great example a few years ago that I really liked, where they took a step back from the path to purchase. They thought about what they really stood for as a brand, how they can provide value and utility. And they ended up developing a simple app with the insight that a lot of people are traveling occasionally in cities they're not familiar with. It's hard to find a clean public restroom. So they created an app called Sit or Squat. And the basic idea is that you pull up any city, it pulls up all the public restrooms, and you don't want to go to one that's marked in red. And I feel like that's a great example of a brand providing true utility. And this is a pre-COVID example, but in the world of COVID, if you've tried to take a road trip and all the restrooms are closed, it's a great example of a brand taking a step back and thinking about how do we grow as a brand to provide better growth, ultimately, growth that actually has an impact on society and the world at large. I want to just close by saying I hope that these helped whet your appetite for what's going to come in 3 weeks as these issues are covered in a much more substantive way. And I hope that you think about your own power and your sense of humor and wherever you work to allow yourselves to change and evolve and talk about many of the issues that we need to talk about. I've greatly enjoyed spending time with you. If you've liked these cartoons, I send out a new one every week and you can sign up for it. And thank you again for having me be a part of this and help kick off this Global Marketing Week in 3 weeks.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was awesome. Really enjoyed it. We have a couple of minutes left for some Q&A, and so to the audience, please feel free to share questions. I'd like to start with the first one. What is the one thing that makes you laugh most about our industry at the moment?
I think the biggest thing, and this is kind of an evergreen, perpetual thing, it's the shiny object syndrome. Whenever something new comes along from a technology perspective, we are so fast as marketers to jump on it. There's always something to make fun of there, particularly something technical. Lately, Clubhouse, for instance, has been something I've kind of played with. I drew a cartoon once that's been an evergreen cartoon, but it applies particularly now. Has a bunch of dogs around a conference table, and one of the dogs is saying, before we talk about our marketing strategy, and staying focused there, look, squirrel, and there's a squirrel running through the background. And I think that's something perpetually in marketing that we all can fall prey to.
I think we can all relate to that. Second question here is, humor is often provocative. Have you ever gotten a pushback for one of your cartoons, something you can remember?
To be honest, yeah, I think a lot about that. I think that humor can be an act of empathy when it's used appropriately. So I think very carefully about what I'm making fun of. And I deliberately try to put myself, if ever there's a butt of the joke, it's kind of me trying to kind of grappling with something. So I haven't experienced as much of that, but I constantly learn from my audience, and occasionally things are unintentionally taken in a certain way, and I continually learning it better. But there hasn't been a big example of that happening in the 20 years that I've been drawing this cartoon.
Excellent. Is there something or someone in our industry who is a particular source of inspiration for your cartoons? Yeah, so I get inspired by lots of things. There's an entrepreneurial couple in Wales named David and Claire Hyatt. They started a number of companies, Howie's, most recently Hyatt Denim. I learned so much from them in how they approach things, particularly as a challenger brand that has to punch harder than their weight. So I constantly see what they write about the world of marketing, and I find that really insightful and a fresh perspective coming from a brand that's really a global micro brand coming from a rural part of Wales. And maybe last question to you. Diversity and inclusion is going to be a big question, big subject for us in 3 weeks' time. You've been a corporate marketer and you're a cartoonist now, looking at our industry with a bit of humor. How would you describe our approach to diversity and inclusion? How do you feel is our industry doing with respect to diversity and inclusion?
Great question. I think this is another case of progress, not perfection, where I do see a lot of progress, but a long way to go. One example that I've really appreciated learning over the years is it comes from Kat Gordon, who I had a chance to work with a few years ago. She started the 3% movement, which was founded on the idea that only 3% of creative directors in the United States were women, even though women are responsible for 80% of purchase decisions and 60% of social sharing. That was a big insight. She started a whole conference series, the 3% conference. And from 2012 to now, that number has risen from 3% to 29%. So that's an example of the progress, but obviously a long way to go. And her journey has started to expand diversity and inclusion to a broader sense. And I feel like we're seeing that across the board. This week, Procter & Gamble had kind of announced the widen the screen movement, where they're going to highlight Black voices before, in front of, and behind the camera in interesting ways. And so I'm seeing a lot of progress, but obviously progress, just because we're seeing progress, we have to make sure not to be complacent.
Look, I'm aware of time, Tom. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your cartoons. Thank you for sharing your work. Thank you for going behind the scenes. It was really awesome. Thank you so much. Now,
thank you so much for having me.
If you've enjoyed some of Tom's cartoons, and Tom was referring to that, and you'd like to see more of them, I'd recommend you go to his website, Marketoonist.com, and you subscribe to his weekly newsletter, and you'll receive a cartoon every week. And I recommend that seriously. It's good fun. Now, if you've not registered yet for the Global Marketer Week, I'd certainly encourage you to do that rapidly and as soon as you can. The speaker lineup this year is really, really strong, and I think it's our chance to trigger real change with a superb program. And I'd like to share with you a scoop today. We're going to be joined in our Global Marketer Week by no one less than Sir David Attenborough, the British natural historian. And Sir David is going to be addressing a message to the industry at that conference, calling for marketing to be part of the solution. So please book your seat rapidly, and we very much look forward to seeing you at Global Marketer Week in 3 weeks' time. Thank you very much.